Part 2 of When in Turin. John rubbed his hands together again. So, what do you think? Who's having Trino? There was a pause. The Scot seemed amused. Well, gentlemen, though we may not be in Rome now, they say that all roads lead to it, and our road may too. So I think I might just say aye to a wee dram. The balding Londoner shrugged his shoulders. Yeah, why not? Okay for me. Yeah, I'm up for it too, said Hugh. The fat Londoner was far from convinced. You're all mad. Have you forgotten what time it is? Just get me a nice frothy cappuccino with no crap in it. Well, I'm not a big fan of liqueurs, announced John, who had by now managed to persuade not only the others but also himself of his very approximate translation of scontrino. But maybe I'll have just a little. They sorted out exactly who was having what, at which point the barman returned. John cleared his throat once again and delivered some confident-sounding Italian. Allora, one espresso with Trino and another normal espresso, that is, without Trino. The barman stared at him, completely mystified. And 2 cappuccinos, one with Trino and another one with only a small amount, best not to exaggerate so early in the morning, and a caffè macchiato with Trino. The barman continued staring at him, confused by this stream of nonsense. Particularly distracting was that although John's knowledge of Italian was not great, his Italian accent, perhaps in part owing to the fact that his mother was Spanish, was quite convincing. But it was all rubbish. Eh? Said the barman. John was surprised by this reaction after the prodigious effort he had put into expressing himself correctly. The Scot and the Londoners were, of course, unable to understand anything of this. At this point, Hugh decided to take control. His Italian, however, was slow and with a strong English accent. Dunque, we'd like 1 espresso with Trino and 1 without Trino, please, and 2 cappuccinos, 1 with Trino and 1 ticket, til, casa. These strange sounds were from the barman, clearly able to stand it no longer. With one hand, he was waving a used receipt at them, while with the other, he was pointing towards the cash desk behind them. They finally understood. Hugh and John looked round at the till, which had a large sign above it, Casa. Now what? Asked the balding Londoner. Further problems, gentlemen? Inquired the Scot. No, good heavens, it's nothing, Hugh replied, doing his best to be blasé. We just have to pay at the till first, over there. But you said we'd pay afterwards, the balding Londoner noted observantly. And now you're telling us, exclaimed the fat Londoner, that we've got to pay before, or make up your minds. Hugh was irritated. Well, I suppose they have a special system in service stations. I was sure that you paid afterwards. What escapes my modest understanding, added the Scot, is why we are thinking in terms of before or after. Wouldn't it be simpler if we paid during? More and more pedantic, he went on. We ask for a drink. The barman brings the drink. We pay the barman, who, as a result of his manager's truly ingenious initiative, is possessed of a cash desk behind the counter. Even the worst pubs of Glasgow can manage that one. This is greeted with laughter from the Londoners. Nah, that's too simple for Italians, isn't it? The balding one laughed. Everything's so complicated over here. Hugh was feeling annoyed by this criticism of the people and culture he had been studying for the last 2 years. Look, let's just go and pay, shall we? There were 4 people waiting to be served at the till. Oh, now there's a queue, said one of the Londoners. This is totally mental, said the other. We have to queue here and then queue again at the counter. The Scot added his contribution. Finely observed, gentlemen, especially inconvenient if you have a bus to catch. Several complaints later, they finally reached the front of the queue. The cashier was a middle-aged woman with a no-nonsense look about her. Buongiorno, said Hugh warmly, sounding very English. He then launched once again into the ponderous but now well-rehearsed order. 2 espressos, one of them with Trino, and another cappuccino, but with less Trino than before, and a caffè macchiato with Trino. As this torrent of rubbish emerged from Hugh's mouth, the cashier watched him carefully. Whereas with the barman, John had delivered his nonsense in reasonably authentic-sounding Italian, Hugh's nonsense was announced in a dreadful foreign accent. The cashier, however, having decided that she was probably dealing with a madman, pragmatically ignored all references to this mysterious Trino and gave him the receipt. Hugh handed over the money uncertainly and returned to the counter with the others. He gave the receipt to the barman. Buongiorno, 2 cappuccini, uno con Trino. Non si preoccupi, ci penso io, interrupted the barman, telling them not to worry and assuring them that he could sort it out on his own. He then grabbed the scontrino and ran off to get the drinks. They all watched the barman's movements, curious to know exactly what he was going to add to their coffee, but their attention was distracted by the arrival of a busload of tourists. Presently, the barman returned. Right, announced the Scot. We finally have the opportunity to sample this local speciality. And it's about time. He sipped the coffee and let it slosh around in his mouth in the manner of a wine taster. That Torino's got a real taste. Has it? Said the balding Londoner, evidently not persuaded. I can't really taste it. Oh, there's definitely something there, said a pompous-sounding John, whose belief in his translational abilities was firmer than ever. But what taste is it? His own doubts also now removed, Hugh paused for some serious reflection. It's aniseed. Not very strong, perhaps, but unmistakable all the same. It's aniseed. Bit of an aftertaste, though, added the Scot disapprovingly. The fat Londoner was staring at them. You're all crazy. All of you, drinking liqueurs at 5 a.m. That moment, an attractive woman entered the cafe. They were all struck by her looks and elegance and were unable to avert their eyes. She turned to one of the barmen and asked in Italian if she needed to get the scontrino first. Devo fare lo scontrino? The barman confirmed this and told her to pay at the cash desk. Fortunately, this brief exchange could have been in Sanskrit for all the Scots and Londoners understood, but John and Hugh stared at each other. The scales had finally fallen from their eyes. When they first spoke to the barman, he had said not contrino, but scontrino, which was nothing more than the receipt. They continued looking at each other, and then gradually the laughter began. Shortly after, the two of them were bent double, holding their stomachs. The fat Londoner looked at them, astonished. What's so funny? The howls of laughter were now bouncing off the walls of the sleepy cafe. The cashier, shaking her head in disbelief, announced that the English were all mad. Sti inglesi sono tutti fuori di testa. The Scot, now rather irritated, tried to make himself heard above all the laughter. Would you care to share the joke with us, gentlemen? Oh, really? Hugh spluttered. It's nothing at all. Just a bit hysterical, that's all. Early breakfast and all that. Aniseed, John shouted. The balding Londoner looked concerned. It must be that liqueur. It's firewater. Yeah, confirmed the other Londoner. Best not to have another Trino, guys. I agree entirely, pronounced the Scot. It's becoming painfully obvious that these two young men have been destroyed by this Trino. That's it. That's the end of the story. My first encounter with the Italian language. My first live encounter with the Italian language.